Once upon a time, there was an old pine tree living in the middle of a vast forest. The pine tree was like a leader, protecting and caring for the plants, shrubs, birds, and other trees around it. For years, it tirelessly shared the energy it received from the sun, the shade it provided to the ground, and the birds that nested in its branches. Other trees, birds, and animals of the forest sought protection in its shade and found rest around its trunk. One summer day, the forest was struck by a severe drought. Lakes, streams, and rivers began to dry up slowly. The animals were tired from thirst, and the leaves of the trees wilted. A young sapling asked the old pine tree, tremblingly, "Old pine, what should we do?" The old pine looked with great sadness at its beloved forest, to which it devoted its whole life. The sun was not as bright as before. The streams were not as loud as before. The trees were not as lush as before. The flowers were not as beautiful as before. The birds that rested in my shade and built nests in my branches for so many years are now flying silently past me, thought the old pine tree. Those who were once always with you, like old friends, were now far away. Turning to the young pine next to it, it said, "Once upon a time, there were trees here that I grew up with. Even if they didn't leave, they would feel my shadow and find safety in the noise of my branches. But who knows where they are now?" It seemed like the old friend's place could never be filled. The tree remembered all the trees and birds it had often hung out with. It thought about them and how it had devoted itself to its friends, but they had never returned the favor. It hoped that one day they would come back and return the favor. After all, it had been loyal to them and had done everything it could for them. Lost in its thoughts, it suddenly felt a raindrop on its leaves. The raindrop it felt on its leaves began to increase. When it looked up, it saw a weeping cloud. The pine tree asked the cloud, "What happened to the cloud?" it asked. The cloud said to the pine tree, "My friends don't talk to me anymore." The pine tree said to the cloud, "You shouldn't be so upset." The cloud said to the pine tree, "I have no friends other than them." The pine tree said to the cloud, "I also had many friends, but they don't come to see me anymore. They don't talk to me anymore." It said, "This is not loneliness," it said. "The whisper of the wind, the song of the birds, the silence of the land, they are all my friends. Just notice." Cloud's tears faded away. "Maybe you're right," it said. From that day on, the cloud focused on the beauty around it instead of loneliness and gratefully sent rain every time it visited the pine tree. The cloud's tears of joy were now what wet the pine tree. The pine tree had finally reached the water it needed. The sun had blossomed as before. Although the tree was heartbroken for its parents coming back to it, it also understood them. They also had families to look after. Therefore, this heartbreak did not last long, and the entire forest regained its former joy.